Picture a land on the edge of something new. It's 1775, and the 13 American colonies, stretched along the Atlantic coast, are restless. For over a century, men and women, farmers, merchants, blacksmiths, have carved lives from this rugged soil under the shadow of a distant British crown. But that shadow has grown heavy. Taxes without consent, soldiers in the streets, and a king who seems deaf to their cries. This is the story of how those colonies lit a fire of freedom, a revolution that changed the world.
It began with discontent. The British Empire, victorious after the 7 Years' War, needed money to pay its debts. So, Parliament turned to the colonies, imposing taxes on sugar, on stamps, on tea. But the colonists, proud of their self-governing ways, saw these as chains. No taxation without representation, they cried. In Boston, crowds gathered, defiant. They dumped tea into the harbor, a bold act of protest. The king responded with force, closing ports and sending troops. By 1775, the colonies were a powder keg, waiting for a spark. That spark came in April, in the quiet towns of Lexington and Concord. British soldiers marched to seize colonial weapons, but farmers and militiamen stood ready. Shots rang out. Nobody knows who fired first. 8 colonists fell on Lexington Green, but the militia fought back, harassing the redcoats all the way to Boston. The war had begun. The colonies faced a choice: reform or revolution. In Philadelphia, the Continental Congress met. Delegates from 13 colonies, arguing, planning. By June 1776, the answer was clear. They would not just fight, they would break free. A committee drafted a bold declaration, its words ringing like a bell across history. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. On July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was born, proclaiming a new nation founded on liberty. But words alone wouldn't win freedom. The fight was daunting. Britain's army was the mightiest in the world, trained, disciplined, vast. The colonists had ragtag militias, untrained farmers with muskets, and a fledgling army led by a Virginia surveyor named GeorgeWashington. Yet, they had something else. A belief in their cause, a fire that burned brighter than fear. The war tested that fire. Early battles, like Bunker Hill, showed the colonists could stand toe-to-toe with the British, though at great cost. But defeats piled up. New York fell, and Washington's army dwindled. By winter 1776, hope seemed lost. Then came a daring move. On Christmas night, Washington crossed the icy Delaware River, surprising enemy forces at Trenton. A small victory, but it kept the revolution alive. The war dragged on. In 1777, the tide turned at Saratoga, where colonial forces trapped a British army. This victory wasn't just a win on the battlefield. It convinced France to join the fight, sending ships, soldiers, and supplies. The revolution was no longer a colonial rebellion. It was a global war. But the cost was brutal. Soldiers starved at Valley Forge, their feet wrapped in rags, their breath visible in the freezing air. Yet they endured, trained, and emerged stronger. By 1780, the war shifted south. The British captured Charleston, hoping to crush the rebellion. But they didn't count on the grit of Southern militias. Farmers turned fighters, striking from swamps and forests. Battles at Kings Mountain and Cowpens wore down the British. Then, in 1781, the final blow came at Yorktown, Virginia. Washington, with French allies, trapped General Cornwallis's army against the sea. French ships blocked escape. For days, cannons roared. On October 19th, 1781, Cornwallis surrendered. The music of defeat was a British band playing "The World Turned Upside Down." Yorktown wasn't the end, but it broke Britain's will. Peace talks began, and in 1783, the Treaty of Paris recognized the United States as a free nation. From those 13 colonies, a nation rose. A nation that would stumble, grow, and redefine itself. The fire of 1776 still burns in the American spirit, a reminder that freedom is fought for, not given. So here we stand, on the ground where muskets fired and ideals were forged. The American Revolution wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning, a spark that lit a nation. Its story reminds us that liberty is fragile, hard-won, and worth defending. This is the fire of freedom, and it still lights the way. When I think of Abraham Lincoln, the first image that comes to mind is a small log cabin in rural Kentucky. That's where he was born in 1809. His father was a poor farmer, a man who toiled endlessly to make ends meet. Lincoln's childhood was tough, no luxuries, barely any schooling. Yet, young Abraham had this incredible thirst for knowledge. By candlelight, or sometimes sitting by the fire, he'd read whatever books he could get his hands on, borrowed from neighbors or hard-earned through odd jobs. Those books were his window to a bigger world. Lincoln grew up working hard, splitting logs, helping on the farm, but his mind was always racing. He wasn't content just surviving. He wanted to understand the world, to make something of himself. He taught himself law, reading legal texts late into the night. Can you imagine that? No formal education, yet he became a lawyer through sheer determination. But his life wasn't just about personal success. Lincoln saw a country tearing itself apart over slavery. As a young man, he'd seen the horrors of it firsthand, and it stuck with him. When he entered politics, he spoke with a clarity that cut through the noise. His debates with Stephen Douglas in 1858, when he ran for Senate, showed his gift. Plain words, sharp logic, and a moral compass that didn't waver. He didn't win that race, but his voice echoed across the nation. By 1860, he was elected president. A man from a log cabin, now leading a divided country. The Civil War broke out, and Lincoln faced a nightmare. Brothers fighting brothers, a nation on the brink. He wrestled with every decision, knowing lives hung in the balance. The Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 wasn't just a policy. It was his heart on paper, declaring freedom for millions. He knew it wouldn't fix everything, but it was a step toward justice. What strikes me most about Lincoln is his resilience. He lost elections, faced criticism, and carried the weight of a bleeding nation, yet he never gave up. His speeches, like the Gettysburg Address, weren't just words. They were a call to hold the country together, to build something better. Even when he was tired, even when hope seemed faint, he kept going. Tragically, just days after the Civil War ended, in 1865, he was assassinated. But his ideas, equality, unity, perseverance, didn't die. They shaped America's path forward. That's the story of Lincoln I carry with me. A man who rose from nothing, faced impossible odds, and left a legacy that still burns bright. When I think of Lincoln's struggles, I'm drawn to the story of how he became a lawyer. Picture a boy with only a few months of formal schooling, yet a mind burning with curiosity. Growing up in the wilderness of Indiana, Lincoln had no fancy libraries or mentors. Books were his teachers, and he'd walk miles to borrow them. By his early 20s, while working odd jobs, splitting rails, running a general store, he stumbled across Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England. That book sparked something in him. Late at night, after grueling days of labor, he'd study by firelight, piecing together legal principles. No law school, no professor, just raw determination. By 1836, at age 27, he passed the bar exam and became a lawyer in Illinois. His practice wasn't glamorous. He rode the circuit, traveling dusty roads to small-town courthouses, taking cases for farmers and merchants.
What made him stand out was his honesty. Folks called him Honest Abe because he'd never take a case he didn't believe in. Once, he even scolded a client for lying, saying he'd rather quit than defend a falsehood. That's Lincoln, a self-taught man whose moral compass guided him as much as his intellect.
Let me take you to 1861, when Lincoln became president. Imagine the pressure. The country was fracturing, with southern states seceding over slavery. Lincoln, now 52, stepped into the White House knowing war was coming. I can almost see him pacing at night, his tall frame stooped with worry. He wasn't a military man, yet he had to lead a nation through its bloodiest conflict. He read military strategy books, met with generals, and wrestled with every decision. One moment stands out: the Emancipation Proclamation. By 1862, the Civil War was raging, and Lincoln saw a chance to strike at slavery, the war's root cause. He drafted the proclamation, declaring enslaved people in Confederate states free. It wasn't perfect. It didn't free everyone, but it changed the war's purpose. When he signed it on January 1st, 1863, his hand trembled, not from doubt, but from the weight of the moment. He told those around him, "If my name ever goes into history, it will be for this act." And he was right. It was a bold step, driven by his belief that no nation could endure half slave, half free. Now, let's talk about Lincoln's last days, a story that's both triumphant and heartbreaking. By April 1865, the Civil War was nearly over. The Union had won, and Lincoln's vision of a united nation was within reach. I imagine him walking through Richmond, the fallen Confederate capital, just days before, surrounded by freed Black Americans who saw him as their liberator. His face, lined with years of strain, must have carried a quiet hope. On April 14, he went to Ford's Theater to watch a play, seeking a rare moment of rest. That night, John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer, shot him. Lincoln died the next morning. The nation wept, not just for a president, but for a man who'd carried them through darkness. His death was a gut punch, but his legacy endured. The 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery, was passed later that year, cementing his vision. When I think of Lincoln's final days, I see a man who gave everything, his strength, his heart, for a better America, even if he didn't live to see it fully realized. These stories, his rise as a lawyer, his burden as president, and his tragic end, show why Lincoln's life still resonates. He was proof that grit, principle, and compassion can change the world.